The diner buzzed with the usual mid-morning chatter, silverware clinking against plates, and the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. Among the swirl of conversations, a small girl with golden curls sat in a red leather booth, her wide eyes fixed on the waitress who had just poured coffee for her father. The man, tall and sharply dressed in a navy suit, looked every bit the successful professional he was, known in his company as a CEO who rarely showed emotion. Yet here, in this cozy corner, he was simply a single dad, doing his best to hold his little family of two together. His daughter, no more than 6, tugged gently on his sleeve before leaning toward the waitress with an innocence that disarmed everyone within earshot. "Can you be my mommy?" she asked in a trembling voice, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the table. The waitress froze, her pen slipping slightly from her fingers as her eyes widened in shock. The father's face drained of color, his carefully guarded composure cracked, leaving him caught between heartbreak and helplessness. Diners nearby turned to look, whispers rippling through the room like a soft tide. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The simple question carried the weight of countless unspoken nights, of bedtime stories read by a tired father, of birthday candles blown out without a mother's embrace, of a little girl's longing too big for her small world. The CEO, who closed multi-million-dollar deals without hesitation, suddenly found himself utterly speechless, his throat tight, his eyes glistening. And the waitress, with kind eyes and a life of her own struggles, felt a surge of empathy so strong it nearly knocked the air out of her chest. No one knew yet that this single question would change all their lives forever. The waitress, whose name was Emily, slowly crouched down to meet the little girl's gaze. Her heart squeezed as she saw the hope shining in those innocent eyes, a hope so pure it made her forget about the tray she was holding or the table she still had to serve. Emily had been through storms of her own, working double shifts to support her younger brother, putting her dreams of college aside, and patching together a life that often felt like it was unraveling. Yet in that moment, staring at the child who clung to her with unshakable trust, all she could feel was the raw ache of a need greater than her own. The father, still frozen, opened his mouth but no words came. He was a man who never allowed vulnerability in boardrooms, yet here he was, disarmed by the courage of a child who spoke aloud what he had feared she carried in her heart. "Sweetheart," Emily whispered gently, her voice trembling, "I'm sure your daddy loves you very much." But the little girl shook her head, her lips quivering, "I know, but I want someone who tucks me in like my friends' moms do. Someone who brushes my hair and sings me songs." Tears pooled in Emily's eyes before she could stop them. She glanced at the father, who was staring down at the table, his jaw clenched, his hand gripping his coffee cup like it was the only anchor keeping him steady. Around them, the diner grew quieter, strangers stealing glances with softened eyes, some hiding their own tears. In that fragile silence, Emily realized she was standing in the middle of something far greater than a morning shift. She didn't know where this moment would lead, but she knew one thing: sometimes life didn't wait for us to be ready. It simply handed us choices that could change everything. The CEO, whose name was Daniel, finally found his voice, though it was huskier than usual, thick with unspoken emotion. "Lily," he said softly, calling his daughter by name, "we've talked about this before. Mommy's in heaven now, remember?" The little girl nodded slowly, but the longing in her eyes didn't fade. She turned back to Emily, as if her tiny heart believed that this kind woman might be the answer to her unspoken prayers. Daniel pressed his fingertips to his temple, trying to compose himself, but the truth was, he was exhausted from being both father and mother, from trying to fill shoes that weren't his to fill, from carrying the unending grief of losing the woman he loved while still holding himself together for his child. For years, he had built walls around his heart, shielding it with work, schedules, and success. Yet now, one innocent question had torn those walls down in seconds. Emily stood frozen, her apron brushing against the side of the booth, her mind racing. She wasn't this girl's mother, she wasn't even someone close to the family, but the child's plea stirred something deep inside her, something she couldn't ignore. She thought of her own struggles, the nights she wished for a helping hand, the times she had silently begged for kindness and found none. Maybe this was why her heart felt like it was breaking, because she understood loneliness, too. She glanced at Daniel, who looked utterly undone, his shoulders slumped, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. She could have walked away, let the moment fade, but instead, Emily reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "Sweet girl," she whispered, "you don't have to ask me to love you. Some people come into our lives not by blood, but by heart." The words surprised even her, but the truth in them was undeniable. Daniel's chest tightened at Emily's words, as though she had spoken a language his heart had long forgotten. He swallowed hard, blinking back the moisture in his eyes, but Lily's face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in months. The little girl wrapped her small arms around Emily's neck, burying her face against her shoulder as though she had finally found a safe place to rest. Emily held her carefully, torn between the instinct to comfort and the fear of stepping into something far deeper than she had ever imagined. Around them, the diner had grown completely silent, every patron seemingly invested in the fragile, beautiful scene unfolding before them. One older woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while a young couple clasped hands more tightly. For Daniel, the weight of the moment was unbearable. He was a man who managed empires, yet here he stood, powerless against the love his daughter so desperately sought. And yet, there was something about Emily's presence, gentle, selfless, authentic, that pierced through his carefully constructed armor. It terrified him, but it also stirred something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Emily finally eased Lily back into the booth, brushing her cheeks with a napkin to catch the tears. "I can't promise to be your mommy," she said softly, "but I can promise that you are special, and worthy of all the love in the world." Lily nodded, sniffling, and glanced at her father as though asking if it was okay to believe those words. Daniel exhaled shakily, his gaze meeting Emily's with a depth that made her heart race. In that silent exchange, something shifted, a fragile bridge was built between two strangers bound not by choice, but by compassion. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but both sensed this encounter wasn't meant to be fleeting. As Daniel sat there, watching his daughter lean trustingly against Emily, something inside him broke free. For so long, he had believed that strength meant carrying everything alone, shielding his pain, hiding his grief, and pushing forward as though success could erase the emptiness. But in this tiny diner, with strangers looking on and his daughter's innocent words echoing in the air, he realized strength sometimes meant letting others in. His hand trembled slightly as he reached across the table, his voice steady but tender. "Thank you," he said, his eyes locking with Emily's. "You didn't have to care, but you did. And it means more than I can ever explain." Emily felt her throat tighten, surprised at the sincerity in his tone. She had always believed her life was too ordinary, too small to matter beyond the walls of her own struggles. Yet here was a man, someone powerful, wealthy, respected, who looked at her as though her compassion had changed his world. She glanced at Lily, whose tiny hand now rested trustingly in hers, and something inside her whispered that maybe this was why life had led her here. The moment was quiet, but it was alive with possibility, like the first rays of dawn breaking through after a long night. Daniel knew he wasn't making promises, and Emily wasn't offering answers, but they had all been given something rare, a glimpse of healing, born from kindness. As they stood to leave, Lily hugged Emily once more, whispering, "Thank you for listening." And with that, the three of them stepped into the cool morning air, carrying with them a fragile yet undeniable truth, that sometimes, it isn't grand gestures that change lives, but small moments of compassion that ripple into forever. The world outside bustled on, unaware, but for them, everything had quietly begun anew.